My name is John Haber. I'm the Field Services Director for the California Preservation Foundation. I wanted to encourage you to become a member of CPF and enjoy the benefits and educational discounts. Information on membership can be found on our website at californiapreservation.org. The California Preservation Foundation is a membership-based, not-for-profit organization whose mission is to provide statewide leadership in education and advocacy to ensure protection of historic resources in California. The format for today's webinar will consist of one presentation of 60 to 75 minutes. We will close with a 10 to 15 minute question and answer period. On the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you will see a question and answer box. If you have a question at any time during the presentation, please type it in the box and we will hold that question until it can be addressed by a speaker. Right above the Q&A box, you'll find a chat box, which is visible to all participants. If you would like to comment or interject, you may do so through the chat box. If you are attached to a microphone, you should grant Adobe Connect voice access to your microphone when asked to do so. Your voice will be muted during most of the presentation, but you may raise your hand by clicking on the hand symbol at the top of the screen. Once your hand is raised, we will grant you voice access at an appropriate time in the presentation. This will allow you to have a short dialogue with the speaker or ask a question in person. If for some reason your sound does not work, you will need to type in your question or response in the chat box. I'm now going to introduce today's speaker. Architect and historian Alan Hess is the architecture critic of the San Jose Mercury News and a contributor to the Architect's newspaper. He has written 19 books on modern architecture and urbanism in the mid-20th century. His latest book, Frank Lloyd Wright, Natural Design, Organic Architecture, was published in October of 2012. He has written monographs on architects Oscar Niemeyer, Frank Lloyd Wright, and John Locher, as well as architectural histories of Las Vegas and Palm Springs. Hess's other books include Googie, Ultramodern Roadside Architecture, Forgotten Modern, and The Ranch House. He is currently researching the architecture of Irvine, California, one of the United States' largest master-planned communities of the 1960s and 1970s. Hess was a National Arts Journalism Program Fellow at Columbia University's School of Journalism and received a grant from the Graham Foundation for Advanced Studies in Fine Arts to research the work of Brazilian landscape architect Roberto Burle Marx. He has a Master's of Architecture degree from the Graduate School of Architecture and Urban Planning at UCLA. His work has received the 2014 Award of Excellence from Docomomo US for curating the city, modern architecture in LA, a website produced in collaboration with the Los Angeles Conservancy, the 1997 Honor Award from the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and the President's Award from the California Preservation Foundation. Hess has been active in the preservation of post-World War II architecture, qualifying several significant buildings for the National Register of Historic Places, including the oldest McDonald's drive-in restaurant, 1953, Downey, California, Edward Durrell Stone's Stewart Pharmaceutical Factory, 1958, Pasadena, Wordman and Beckett's Bolex, Pasadena, 1947, and Edward Varney's Valley Home Motor, 1957, Scottsdale. Without further ado, we will now begin the presentation, but before doing so, I'm going to briefly mute all users who have dialed in.
And thank you all for being here this afternoon. I see a number of friends in the list, and hi to everybody. And everybody else who's here, I hope we can discuss this afternoon the state of knowledge of California modern architecture. Because we think we know what California modern architecture is. We have a few images in mind. There's certain there are conventional wisdoms about what California modernism was all about, but there's a lot more than that to it. And I hope today, there are about 150 slides. I hope we'll get through at least most of them. But to show you really what the full, well, at least a glimpse of the range of ideas, concepts about architecture, styles, aesthetics, and a number of different designers, some of whom you may have heard of, some of whom you may not have. I am, in fact, right at the moment about to embark on writing a book on California modernism. I'm going to be co-authoring with Pierluigi Serrano, a very good historian based up in the Bay Area. But we both have felt that there is so much new material out there that has not yet been woven into the story of what California modernism was all about. And that's what we're going to attempt to do. It'll be out hopefully in 2016, if all goes well. There's a tremendous amount of information to be kind of digested and reconsidered. And I think at the end of that process, and hopefully even at the end of today's talk, you'll have a sense that there are many more ideas that California was a fount of creativity of all sorts in architecture and design and planning. And just fascinating stuff. So I'm very glad to be able to share this with you this afternoon. I am sitting here in Irvine, California. It's where I live, and as John mentioned, I have been studying Irvine. Fascinating place, and in fact, also I have an article on the history of Irvine, which is coming out in September of this year in Places, the journal of architecture and design and planning. So if you aren't on my mailing list, do send me your email and I'll be able to send you a reminder of that and other articles that I write, because it's a fascinating material, and it's new material and it's fresh material, a great deal of it. And I would urge all of you also, we need more people to dive into this. We need more people to research some of the architects that I'm going to be talking about today who deserve books, but there are no books on them. So there's plenty of material out there, and I urge all of you to get into a lot of that. Yeah, as I said, I'm here in Irvine. I'm sitting in a 1974 tract house by Walter Richardson, an Orange County architect. It is in a, I've lived here 10 years now, and I fell in love with it the minute I walked into it. It is modern. It's a tract house about 1,800 square feet, one floor. But the way it's set on the site, every room has a different access to the out of doors. And it's a small lot, nothing extraordinary, very suburban. And yet you see how they use design and planning to create a really wonderful house. As I said, it's a tract house. You know, there are 4 models in my neighborhood, and they're all quite interesting, but they're all repetitive. This is part of the genius, I think, of California design. It's not just dependent upon the few individual great architects that we can all name: Schindler, Locher, Eames, Elwood, Koenig. There are so many other creative architects that that did excellent work and that deserve to be known. And they were often working in the commercial realm. Well, we'll be getting into that a little bit later. As we go, do ask questions in the chat box over there. I'll try to remember to look over there and pay attention to that as we're going through. And then we'll leave a little bit of time at the end as well for any more questions. What I'm going to show you today is a number of buildings, number of architects, some of them relate to the issue of preservation. Some are good examples, some are bad examples. And at the end, I'm going to kind of alert you to some of the most immediate dangers to buildings here in California at the moment. What we need to do, as I mentioned before, really is to challenge the conventional wisdom about what California modernism is and to write a new narrative about it. Back in the 50s and 60s, we had a number of very good historians and writers, Esther McCoy, John Intenza, the editor of Arts and Architecture magazine, certainly Rainer Banham. But they were in a different period. They were still fighting the battle of modernism. They were still trying to establish that modernism was good and that its architecture was valid and should be taken seriously. Today, in many ways, that battle has been won. Modernism is accepted. What we're dealing with now is actually trying to save a lot of those modern buildings with the challenges of new development that's coming along. The old narrative about California architecture was unfortunately often misfocused. You'll still see this written about, that California modernism was an offshoot of European modernism, that there were Europeans, Richard Neutra, Rudolf Schindler, and several others, who came over in the 20s or 30s to California, planted the seeds of modernism, and wonderful things grew from that. However, as we will be talking about, California already had a very well-established modern architecture by that time. Europeans contributed, but they added to what was already going on. I've divided the talk today up into a couple of different sections, which each of which hopefully focus on some specific concepts. The first section is I've titled Schindler Goes Hollywood. The second section is Bubble Up, Trickle Down. The third is Pereira, Gruen, Beckett, and Gehry. And then a section on commercial innovation. Then another one on overlooked talent. I just want to throw out a number of images for you, again, to whet your appetite for further research. And then also going on to the issue, finally, of master planning the suburban metropolis, because California is not often given credit for its master planning, and yet it has some really fascinating examples. So, to get on with the slideshows, this, of course, is the Lovell House by Rudolf Schindler. And I choose it because I wanted to talk about Schindler going Hollywood. Schindler, of course, was Austrian, came over before World War I to work with Frank Lloyd Wright. The important thing about his work, he's a brilliant architect, brilliant spaces, brilliant structures. But when he moved to California in the late teens, he went Hollywood. He immersed himself in California, and California became a muse to him. It was the environment, the culture, the attitudes of California changed Schindler, changed his work. And there are other people that happened to. The second section, as I mentioned, bubble up, trickle down. Oftentimes, people see modern architecture as the product of a number of very talented architects, big names that we all know, and those ideas trickle down and are then seen in the work of lesser architects on the streets and houses of the nation, in particular California. That's not the whole story. there's a great deal here in California of bubbling up of commercial ideas, popular architecture, bubbling up from the common culture, from the way people live in everyday life, and creating great architecture. These are two examples of the coffee shops and drive-ins. Times Square, now Johnny's at the corner of La Brea and, not La Brea, Fairfax and Wilshire. And Tiny Nailers by Douglas Honnold. The Times Square, or Johnny's at the top, was by Army and Davis, showing not the influence of high art designers, but rather architects who understood the way modernism was lived in California in the mid-century. The architects of the big offices, William Pereira, Victor Gruen, Welton Beckett, A.C. Martin, have interested me for a number of years. This is the Municipal Water District by William Pereira. These architects were considered merely commercial architects, and their work was not really seriously considered as architecture, certainly not as high art architecture. Today, fortunately, we are 40, 50, 60 years afterwards, and we can see these buildings in an entirely new light. We'll be talking about that. The idea of commercial innovation, this is one obvious example, the drive-in restaurant from the 1930s, designed by Wayne McAllister in 1935. The drive-in was not invented in California, but it was perfected, and this image gives you just a glimpse of that perfection. Then overlooked talent. On the left, certainly not overlooked, Charles Eames's house, very well known. But what about this one on the right? This is a house in Marin County by Warren Callister and Jack Hilmer. Absolutely brilliant architects, partnered for a short time. This was one of the earliest houses using pre-stressed concrete. And look at how they use that to create cantilevers. Amazing amount of creativity in the area. And finally, master planning. This is the Miracle Mile, developed around 1930, Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles, as a new type of urban form, a linear downtown. And we see on the left the Wiltern Theater by Morgan Wallis Clements. And we'll be getting into that whole idea. The idea of a decentralized urban area, suburban metropolis, is something which Los Angeles, but also San Francisco, the San Francisco Peninsula, really developed and explored in the mid-century period. So, to get along to the first section, Schindler Goes Hollywood. Here on the right, you have Rudolf Schindler's own house in West Hollywood. Brilliant design of using modern technology, concrete, tilt-up concrete, with slits of glass between the concrete panels there. And indeed, those panels are slightly tilted as well. The indoor and the outdoor moves together. This, again, is Schindler using the environment, using the climate, using the new technology, and mostly taking advantage of people allowing him to do whatever he wanted to, allowing him to use modern materials in new ways. Back east, and certainly in Europe after World War I, which was still recovering from the war, there was not that possibility to actually build a great deal of these innovative ideas. Unfortunately, the Schindler House was built designed in 22, 23, 24. The architecture books, histories, though, give a lot more credit in the upper left-hand corner to the Rietveld Schroeder House in the Netherlands. That was the image that traditional architectural historians glommed onto as the modern house. And even today, you will see references to the Schroeder House as the first modern house, or the first modern house to go in this direction of abstraction and modernity in the 1920s. Well, that house was built a couple of years after the Schindler House, but because Schindler's house was way out here in the middle of nowhere, on the edge of nowhere in Los Angeles. It took what, from the 20s until really 1960 to begin to get into the architecture books. But nonetheless, you see Schindler, an Austrian, coming over, being influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright, working for Wright, moving to California, and then letting California transform him and his architecture. Another example of this transformation of going Hollywood is Albert Frey out in Palm Springs. That's his house on the left there in Palm Springs in a Julie Schulman photograph. Frey was Swiss, and he worked with Le Corbusier. In fact, he worked with Le Corbusier on the Villa Savoye, which you see on the right there. One of Corbusier's landmark buildings, certainly, very important. Again, even today in the history books, you will see Frey mentioned, and really the important thing about it is he worked with this great modern master, Le Corbusier. Well, in my sense of things, Frey's 60 years of practice in California had a great deal more influence on him. And you see that in his house, the forms, the colors, the indoor-outdoor spaces, the freedom that you see in that building, as well as the concrete. Notice in the foreground, that's a concrete lounge that he's built into the edge of the swimming pool. Frey also went Hollywood. I think this is an important thing for the quality of architecture. I think architecture of all sorts needs to have a foothold in its area, in its location, in the culture, as well as the climate and the technology of where it is built. Unfortunately, today, a number of cities in California, as well as elsewhere, are impressed by big names of international architecture, and they will go overseas, literally, to get an architect for a new museum, a new city hall, a new important landmark. On the left, you see Mario Botta's San Francisco Museum of Modern Art from the 1990s. Not a terribly successful building, an import from Switzerland, and not really changed or modified or transformed by the California environment. On the right, we have the Palace of Fine Arts by Bernard Maybeck. And again, this is the tradition in California, going back over 100 years now, of architects like Maybeck, Julia Morgan, Willis Polk, Ernest Coxhead, many others, who created, starting in the Bay Area, a California architecture. And it borrowed from elsewhere, but it had a special transformative character, which made it specifically and peculiarly Californian. This is part of the history. Well, this is part of the history. This idea of California transforming the architect and their ideas. Bernard Maybeck's Christian Science Church in Berkeley on the lower left-hand corner, a magnificent building, one of my favorite buildings in the entire world, taking modern technology, factory sash windows, concrete, modern material, but blending that all with a sense of history and, most of all, a sense of architectural space. The Green Brothers on the right, also in Southern California, creating these casual, informal, non-Beaux-Art buildings for California. Or Irving Gill, the women's club down in La Jolla, using, again, tilt-up concrete, modern material, and expressing this in this abstracted Spanish style, using these arches to create these wonderful arcades to shelter from the sun, responding to the climate. You have a number of other architects, Lloyd Wright, Frank Lloyd Wright's son, who actually born and raised in Chicago, coming to California in the early teens as well, and gathering there is something fresh, something new here. This is the Raymond Navarro house from 1926 in Hollywood. As you can see how it fits into the hilly Hollywood Hills. John Lautner from Michigan, coming out here and using in his career, this is the Carling House of 1947, using the freedom, the new technology to create just extraordinary. We'll see a number of Locher buildings. He is one of my favorites as well. This is a remarkable technological house. The right-hand side there, you see a steel mast. There are 3 of those steel masts in this house, and the roof that you see is suspended from these 3 masts, thereby allowing you to build on a hilly site without having to have expensive foundations. The response to building in California. Even Richard Neutra, again another Austrian coming to America in I think it was 1924. This is the Kaufman House in Palm Springs. Definitely influenced by European modernism, which he had learned in Austria, going to school and building early on. But also notice how it responds to the desert climate with the indoor-outdoor spaces, the way it responds to the landscape, the mountains beyond, and so forth. A number of other architects responded to a number of other aspects of California. William Worcester, for example. This is a beach house, Stinson Beach, and it is so plain, it's so ordinary. It's a shed. It's a vernacular shed, like he would have seen growing up in Stockton. He was a native there. But look at how it is transformed by proportions, by the simplicity of those shingled walls, shingling being a very cheap and common material, but here used in a very, well, what turned out to be a very expensive house. The use of history, the influence of historical references. We've seen that in Maybach earlier. We see it in many other architects. European modernists had a almost paranoid fear of history. To European modernists, history was kings and queens and oppressions and the church and centuries of rules and regulations and behavior. So European modernists wanted to throw off history. California modernists did not have that background at all, or that fear. And they were able to use historical references in their buildings over and over and over. A number of different styles, again, which grew up in California. This is Ciro's, a nightclub on the Sunset Strip, built in the late 1930s by George Vernon Russell. Very interesting architect who does need a book on his work. But this is the what we now call the Hollywood Regency style. It is modern. It's flat roof. It has plain walls, but it also uses these decorative elements. The dots right there in the corner of the house of the building. This great swooping entryway as well as notice the signage. Signage is a big part of California architecture. All of this comes together. Or Smith and Williams in their office building in South Pasadena as well. This was their offices. They collaborated with landscape architects and planners. They were architects, and they created this marvelous indoor-outdoor office space. You see the grill, the metal grill overhead, which cuts the sunlight, but then also creates a very pleasant working environment for the windowed offices as well as the gardens that you look out on. Or at another part of culture, the elementary school. This is the White Oaks Elementary School in Menlo Park, up in the San Francisco Peninsula, by John Carl Warnecke from the early 1950s. What you see on the left there is the outdoor corridor. It's sheltered overhead, but it is out of doors. And the rooms are off of this curving spine. On the right, you see one of those classrooms coming off of the spine, and the way it has an outdoor space directly off of the room space. Again, responding to the climate, the area, and the sense of freedom about, let's figure out a new way to do schools that works better than the traditional ways. This is part of California modernism. And notice also, again, these buildings that I'm showing you, these are nightclubs, elementary schools, office buildings, houses. Modernism was applied to every part of the city, every part of human life, creating a new modern type of city. And again, I'm going to keep repeating it. Look at the creativity that California architects expressed in solving these problems. It probably, for me, rises to a pinnacle in two buildings built in Southern California in 1964 and 1965. One is the Music Center, shown here by Welton Beckett Associates. A building which has not always gotten the respect that it deserves, but what it embodies is a sense of California in the 1960s becoming the most populous state in the nation, but a state with a tremendous economy of aerospace, of entertainment, of culture, of music, of you name it. California was exercising its muscle, creative muscle, in so many fields. And so when it came to designing, a cultural landmark, a cultural crown for Bunker Hill, it was, of course, Welton Beckett who was to design it. The other great example is the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, built at the same time by William Pereira. Just a magnificent building. You see it here at its opening celebrations as well. A building, we're going to talk about this a little bit more later because this is a threatened building, but a building which captured that sense of vitality, that sense of moving into the future, of knowing the past, building on the past, but not letting the past be a crutch or having to repeat the past, moving forward into the future. These are marvelous buildings that express the culture of the times. I also just wanted to throw in an idea here with these three magazines. Again, in our knowledge of California modernism, in the history books, oftentimes Arts and Architecture magazine will be referred to. The editor, John Intenza, who took over in the 1940s and turned it into a real promotional tool for modern design in California and elsewhere. It was extremely influential, but we should never forget at least two other magazines. Sunset magazine as well, based in the San Francisco Bay Area, published by the Lane brothers as well. It was also committed to modern architecture. That's a Cliff May tract house on the cover of this issue as well. Capturing the California lifestyle and defining it and disseminating it. The third magazine, also a popular magazine, was House Beautiful, edited by Elizabeth Gordon from the 40s into the 1960s as well. That happens to be another Cliff May house on the cover as well. Cliff May was extremely popular with all of these magazines and editors and people as well in California. But these magazines help to define and direct and promote what California modernism was all about. They're very, very important resources to today. Little side note I want to go through quickly, delight. To me, this is a major part of California modernism. Again, European modernism is often very theoretical, very serious. There were tomes of theoretical treatises written about what modern architecture should be in Europe. Not so much in California. California architects all through the years tended not to write or theorize a whole lot in print, but they did have concepts, they did have ideas. and they expressed them in their buildings. One of them was about joy, delight, just the wonder of living. Nobody ever got it better than Bernard Maybach. This is the reader's platform of the Christian Science Church in Berkeley by Maybach. And from the Gothic scrolls of the organ loft, the colors that he uses, the historical elements, but this is all concrete also. And the light coming in from the upper left-hand corner through that stained glass window as well. All the way down to the very bottom is this wonderful forest scene on the face of the platform itself. This is a very influential building. Charles Moore, many other architects later have constantly come back and referred to this. But look at the delight in this building, or in Charles and Ray Eames' own house. The colors, the toys, the glittery lights. This is not meant to be sat in and to think serious and deep and dark thoughts. This is a place to live and to enjoy. But you see that same idea of delight throughout California in the mid-century. For example, this sign for Valley Fair Shopping Center in San Jose as well. Alvin Lustig was a graphic artist who also did some architecture, who worked with many of the major architects of the time on the graphics of those. Or Ghirardelli Square, chocolate factory transformed into a tourist site in the 1960s as well by William Worcester Bernardine Emmons, and Lawrence Halprin. Look at the lights, that pavilion on the left, the flag on top of it, the landscaping, the fountain. All of these things are to create urban delight, and it's a major part of California architecture. Another little side detour here into suburbia and the ranch house. The ranch house, again, California had a major role in creating what we today call the ranch house. Though Texas and other parts of the country also contributed. But here in California, from the 1912, there were vernacular working ranches in California, of course, since the 18th century, really. But in the early 20th century, these vernacular buildings in the beautiful, in the valleys, the mountains of California, simple wood shacks became an influence. This is a building, it looks like a simple wood shack, of course. It is, in fact, a very highly designed house by William Worcester, the Gregory Ranch in Santa Cruz, California, as well. But look how meticulously Worcester has taken those vernacular elements of the California landscape, the wood siding, the porches, the simplicity of the post and beam construction, the windows, and transformed them into a beautiful ranch house, one which turned out to be extremely influential. But even more influential was the mass-produced ranch house. Now, after World War II, the entire nation was getting back to regular life. There was a tremendous demand all across the country for housing as veterans came home from war and went back to normal life. California, however, is where the problem was solved of how to build mass numbers of houses cheaply, efficiently, and also so that people would actually want to buy them. Here you see a very typical ranch house neighborhood in the San Fernando Valley. And behind there you see this structure, this construction pattern of building en mass production, instead of building in a factory, mass producing cars or guns or toasters in a factory, they figured out how to put the factory into the field. So in these houses, you see them at different stages of construction. Some of them are just the concrete pad. Some are the wood stud framing. Some of them have the siding and the roofing put on them. Each one was a stage where mass production was applied to housing construction in the field, in the neighborhood. Just a remarkable innovation for housing, and it worked. It solved the housing crisis in America at that time. And they were developers, Fritz Burns in Southern California, David Bohannon in Northern California, who really learned and applied that process earlier than the Levitts in back east around New York. The possibilities, the range that you could do with these mass-produced houses were really quite extraordinary, and different builders as well as architects. The builder, Joseph Eichler, created the Eichler homes as well, mass-produced houses in a modern style with modern interiors of glass, openness, spaciousness, open plans, exposed wood beam structures, and suited to modern life as it was lived in the 1950s. But we should never think that Eichler was the only builder. There were many other builders building modern architecture, many other architects. For example, these are three models by Palmer and Kreisel in the San Fernando Valley of modern houses for mass-produced tracts. And it was in California, because of the size of the population, because of the openness to new ideas, that many of these got built. Moving on to the next section, bubble up and trickle down. This is one of my favorites, very definitely. The average ordinary landscape of modern California. For example, Reseda Boulevard in 1962. This is modern life. This is the modern city. Modern transportation, the cars, the buildings and the streets and the city are configured for mobility of the populace in cars. But they also need centers. They need commercial centers, places to buy sofas and books and go to the bank and the movie theater and the drugstore and everything else. So they're creating these commercial districts, as on Reseda, repeated all over the state, of course, in similar form. But also notice the signage as well. The signage to help direct you, orient you. All are elements of the modern city for modern life, but which were designed, again, not by well-known architects with famous names, but by, I don't want to say ordinary architects, because some of them were extraordinary, but by architects who didn't seek fame and were just solving a problem of modern life. Another view of a prototype, a Chevron standard gas station as well. Notice the modernity of that design, the way the flat roof folds over, the way that signage, the bold graphic signage, is integrated into the building, as well as the mere function of the gas pumps and so forth. This is the vernacular of the mid-20th century in Los Angeles and in San Jose and in the East Bay and in Fresno and Sacramento and the other cities of California. This is often not really considered fine architecture or serious architecture. The billboards as well, just a wonderful aspect. Look at the scale, the brilliant use of scale to communicate these messages, the fonts, the images, the television set on the right-hand side, the three-dimensional Oreo package as well as the human element of the two children. This is just a marvelous artistic creation, which also works. It has a commercial reason, and it serves it. The Market Basket, a chain of supermarkets in Southern California as well. look at how it integrates that woven lattice work, a very simple vernacular form, but it's blown up to the scale of a billboard to direct you to this wonderful building. These were very common. So we have the vernacular, the commercial world, being modern, solving modern problems. How do you get around? How do you find your supermarket? How do you get home? How do you live life in this modern city? And the modern architects of California are all over it. They are solving it with new orientations of parking lots, cars, signage, as well as the images and forms. But this is where the bubble up comes from. We saw that Oreo billboard before. Well, this is a church by Rudolf Schindler from the 1940s in Los Angeles as well. And this side facing the commercial strip of it is basically a billboard. It has the scale, the shape, the proportion of a billboard. It takes a small building and creates, through the scale of that simple billboard-like side, a presence for that building. So architects like Schindler, again, Schindler going Hollywood, he was living in Los Angeles. He understood Los Angeles. He understood billboards. He understood the automobile. He understood what was going on in the city all around him. He didn't need architects to write theories about how you design for that. He used those elements, and he is not the only one. Lloyd Wright, Frank Lloyd Wright's son, based in Los Angeles, built the Yucca Vine Market in 1928. Again, responding directly to the way modern life was being lived in Los Angeles at the time, creating that wonderful pylon on the left-hand side there, illuminated at night, again, to give a sense of presence and direction to a fairly small roadside supermarket as well. Lloyd Wright, learning from the vernacular, learning from what commercial architects were creating, and then making great architecture out of it. Another great architect, Wayne McAllister. There is a book on him by Chris Nichols, thank goodness. He certainly deserves it, but he's not as well known as he should be. On the upper left-hand corner is one of his Simon's restaurants. We saw another one earlier at night. This building from the mid-1930s is the most, in my opinion, the most modern building in the world from its time period. It is a building which not only has the curving, abstracted lines of modernity, but its very function, the way its circular form is entirely shaped by the automobile, because that's how people are coming to it. Notice also that it's a 24-hour restaurant. It has no front door. That's how life was lived. The restaurant was open 24 hours. People were using it in the modern city 24 hours a day. And so the building was designed to be to match the modern lifestyle as people were living. McAllister went on to build a number of other great buildings, including this Bob's Big Boy on the right-hand side, which still stands. This was a preservation battle 20 years ago now, but thank goodness it was saved and still stands as a restaurant, Bob's Big Boy restaurant in Burbank as well. But you see him in the 30s designing these drive-ins, and then in the 1949 designing this Bob's Big Boy, a larger building, more complex as a program. But you see this evolution of ideas growing up out of the vernacular character of the city. I have to throw in a couple of Googie restaurants. This is Tiny Nailers in this wonderful archival photograph of it. No longer there at the corner of La Brea and Sunset, but the way it evokes, it's a drive-in restaurant, it functions that way, but it also evokes the modern period because it is basically a modern jet plane with this great wing coming out from it, thereby, referring to the character of the culture of the time, the aerospace industry of Southern California. Or John Lautner designing a roadside diner and drive-in, Henry's, in Glendale, 1947, where he creates an outdoor patio on the commercial strip. No one told him no one wants to sit and eat next to the automobiles and the cars driving by. In fact, people did want to, and he designed this wonderful little outdoor patio for that purpose. One of my favorite examples also of this idea of bubbling up from the culture, the way people are living, are the home savings and loan buildings begun in 1955 and designed by the artist Millard Sheets. This is one of the first ones in Beverly Hills that you see there. They're designed for the roadside. They're designed to be seen from the commercial strip. And they have a simplicity and a scale to them, which makes them visible and present on the strip. But then, Sheets, being a very noted artist, incorporated into each one of these an original ceramic tile mural, or sometimes they were stained glass windows as well, which related the bank to the local area. The mural you see there is in the home savings in Santa Monica, near the beach. And so you have children frolicking in the waves and on the sand as well. But this is on the commercial strip. This is art being brought to the average person as they go about their day driving by or as they go to the bank to put their money in. What a concept, what an idea, what creativity, the range of creative responses in styles and in building types of all of these buildings. A car dealership as well, Casa de Cadillac in the San Fernando Valley. Fortunately, also, this building has been recently restored, and you have this enormous glass billboard covering the entire front of the building to showcase the cars, the Cadillacs, with just enough neon signage as well, Casa de Cadillac, to identify the business. Really, really great addition. Well, you can't quite see it, but actually there's an open-air atrium beyond this glass showroom as well to make it all the more open, light, air, and airy. You had car washes, like the one in the upper left-hand corner as well. And I compare this somewhat, not reluctantly at all, but I'm peeved by this, to compare it to the Eames house, which you see there on the right. To me, these are the same building. Conceptually, these are the same building. They are using modern metal technology and parts to create a structure. And they are expressing that structure in their form. The one on the right is a residence. It's more subdued, collected. The one on the left, its purpose is to attract customers on the commercial strip. So it is more opulent, flamboyant, has these forms reaching up into the sky, not only to show the repetitive nature of the structure, but also to grab the eye. Both of these buildings are performing their function, using modern materials. One is a commercial building, and you'll never find that in a serious architectural history. The other one is a residence by a noted architect, and you will find that in many architectural histories. Both of them, I think, need to be equally understood and honored. To jump over a number of years, you wouldn't believe the number of slides I had to cut out of this talk. I'm sorry to say. Hopefully I'll get some of them into the book when it's finally done. But to show that this tradition California architects borrowing from the vernacular landscape, the ordinary life of the state of people. This is Sea Ranch up on the Sonoma coast by Moore, Linden, Turnbull, and Whitaker from the mid-1960s. And they were all noticing and looking at simple mining buildings, barn buildings, ranch buildings throughout Northern California. And they took those ideas and the ordinary wood siding and the shingled roofs and transformed them into these very beautiful, very luxurious condominiums right on the coast. But again, going back to the 1960s, with Lawrence Halprin as landscape architect, responding to a number of ecological and sustainable issues in the design of it. Okay, another favorite field of mine, the big offices, the big corporate offices of Los Angeles. There's a good history to this. These go back quite a ways. On the left is the Richfield building in downtown Los Angeles by Morgan, Walls, and Clements. There's no book on Morgan, Walls, and Clements, which is just to the shame of us all. They did supermarkets, they did skyscrapers, they did every type of building. They were one of the largest offices in California at the time. And this terracotta covered building, Richfield oil, so it's black, but then with these beautiful gold finials. And up in San Francisco, at exactly the same time, another extremely talented architect, Timothy Pfluger, designing the telephone building in downtown Los Angeles. Also covered in terracotta, also covered in ornament, modern ornament at the time. These were expressions of the modern era by California architects dating back to the 20s and 30s already. As I said before, California had modern architecture long before Europeans introduced the international stuff. But coming up into the 1950s, the Department of Water and Power by A.C. Martin, one of the great large firms of Southern California. Victor Gruen. Victor Gruen is, interestingly, another Austrian, like Schindler and Neutra, coming over to the United States before World War II and ending up in 1940 in Los Angeles. His firm became one of the most influential incubators for urban planning in the country. And they began it with doing small shops, then building up to department stores, and then eventually what Gruen is primarily known for, shopping malls, combining stores. This is an early building from the late 40s. It's a single department store, Mill Irons, in Westchester, a brand new suburban area. And so many wonderful innovations here. You can see the parking on the roof, for example, and with escalators going down into the middle of the store. Gruen did any number of different buildings. He did banks in Palm Springs. He did this public housing in Pacoima as well, which still stands up very well as a community. Welton Beckett, with his partner Walter Werdeman in the early years, designing in the mid-1930s the Pan Pacific Auditorium in Los Angeles, but then moving on to larger buildings, the Prudential Building on the Miracle Mile, or the Capitol Records Building in Hollywood as well, seen here under construction. And oh, good. Yes, I have a notice here. Okay, Diane Williams wrote a very exhaustive MA thesis at UCLA in the mid-1970s and 80s on Morgan, Walls, and Clements under her name of Diane Hlava, H-L-A-V-A. Okay, that's from Diane Kane. Thank you, Diane. That's good to know. So there is information out there. They're not a book, but there is information on Morgan, Walls, and Clements Very, very important firm. So with each of the architects, Beckett is a good example. How would we think of Los Angeles without ever having experienced the Pan Pacific building, or the Capitol Records building, or the Music Center that Beckett also did? These are defining buildings of California and of California modernism. The Memorial Sports Arena, also by Beckett. The Cinerama Dome, by Beckett. The Kaiser Center in Oakland, by Beckett. Equally, the firm of Pereira and Luckman, William Pereira and Charles Luckman. Later, they went their own ways, but building buildings which were defining modernism, the modern life, whether it was an office building, like the Union Oil building here in downtown Los Angeles, or places of entertainment, Marineland of the Pacific and Palos Verdes as well, designed by Pereira and Luckman, responding to the way of life of people in the 1950s. There were all of these housing tracts, all of these young families. Where were they going to go to entertain their children? Well, one idea was this idea of a theme park, a marine land as well, to educate people about marine life. Or CBS Television City. It's an extraordinary building, built in 1951 by Pereira and Luckman as a factory for television. In 1951, television was brand new as a technology, and they designed this building to be a factory for the production of television shows. An extraordinary program, an extraordinary response, but even more extraordinary because this building is still in use 60 years later. Now, what kind of creativity, what kind of insight, what kind of understanding of the way of life of people in that period does it take for modern architects to be able to do that? Well, Pereira and Luckman were able to do that. Also, another new type of building for the new type of city. This is, of course, the theme building at LAX, designed by Pereira and Luckman, Welton Beckett, and Paul R. Williams. They designed the entire airport. A new jetport, a new type of transportation, a new type of facility for a new modern city. A new type of university campus. This is the University of California at Irvine, designed by William Pereira in 1965. It's about to celebrate its 50th anniversary as well. Clark Kerr, the president of the University of California, realized that the university system was going to fuel the growth of California in the future. And so these universities were incredibly important as sites for that sort of development. And Pereira was able to capture that sense of looking towards the future in these buildings. And at the same time, back in the 1960s, responding to ecological issues. This happens to be a building at University of Southern California with built-in sunscreens. So Pereira was in the 1960s thinking about sustainability, how to cut down energy costs and manage the sunlight of the area. Back in the 1960s, this is forward-looking thinking. The Transamerica Tower in San Francisco, also by William Pereira. And in the title of this, I talk about Pereira, Gruen, Beckett, and Gehry. Well, there is a direct link between those great commercial firms who have not been given much credit, but who are responsible for really designing the modern city of Los Angeles, certainly. And Frank Gehry, one of the star architects of today, studied with William Pereira at USC Architecture School. He worked for Pereira for a time. Even more so, he worked with Victor Gruen in the 1950s and into the early 1960s. And Gruen loved Frank Gehry, and Frank Gehry loved Victor Gruen. Now, those are two names we don't usually associate. Gruen is this commercial architect doing malls. Gehry is this architect designing Disney Hall and other wonderful, progressive buildings. And yet, at the root, there's a connection there. And I think it's one of the things which contributes to Gehry's, the success of his designs as well, that he was grounded in those practical issues of the modern city that Gruen dealt with. On the right, on the left is the Danziger studio, one of the first buildings Gehry did by himself for Lou Danziger, a graphic artist as well. Still stands on Melrose. And on the right, we see Disney Hall, but how it responds to a building by Welton Beckett, the Music Center. Those curves are not all accidental. Edward Durrell Stone, another, actually an architecture office that we think of as a national, even international office. But Edward Durrell Stone had an office in San Francisco and then in Los Angeles from the 1950s on. This is the main library of Palo Alto, designed in the late 1950s by Edward Durrell Stone. You can sort of tell by the pierced concrete block. But other than that, it is not what we usually think of as Edward Durrell Stone. It's wonderfully, humanely scaled. It's got color to it. It's a neighborhood scale to it. And has wonderful spaces inside, including a fireplace to sit around and read books at. Or the Stanford Hospital, built in 1959. That's Stanford by Edward Durrell Stone. Now, this building is threatened. Stanford University, one of the major cultural institutions in the United States of America, owns this building, and they are seeing fit to demolish this in the next few years. Not to build anything new. The new hospital is going to be built someplace else, an updated hospital, but just to get it out of the way. Now, that to me for a cultural institution is inexcusable, especially because in these interior courtyards, bringing light and air into the center of the hospital, you have landscaping by Thomas Church, the great landscape architect. You see it a bit on the right as well. At Caltech, Beckman Auditorium by Edward Durrell Stone. And then this is an interesting one. This is a perpetual savings bank building in Beverly Hills by Edward Durrell Stone from the mid-1960s. Look at that peculiar geometry of those arches. They're not just simple arches at all. They're actually they're both concave and convex, and they're an odd shape, and the geometry of them is really, really startling, especially taken from this angle. This is the mid-1960s, and I would say before computers were used to create astonishing shapes and angles in modern buildings. On the right is a building currently under construction on Bunker Hill. It's the Broad Museum, designed by Diller Scofidio and Renfro, one of the main, most well-known architects of today for their daring work. Well, do you notice any similarity between what Edward Durrell Stone did in the 1960s and what Diller Scofidio and Renfro are doing now? This shows, again, that these buildings by these architects, like Stone. Stone has been maligned and dismissed and for decades now. And yet when we go back and look at what they did, what the real character of these buildings are, we see these ideas. Suddenly there's something more valuable there to look at than we might have thought about. John Carl Warnecke, another great, one of the big corporate offices. This is Oakland Airport. This is one of the bad examples of historic preservation. Look what they did on the lower right there to those wonderful arches a couple of years ago. No sense of the quality of the original building. These are the executive office buildings in Washington, D.C., in the upper right-hand part of the slide, by John Carl Warnecke, right above the Renwick Gallery and Lafayette Square, right across from the White House. But notice again, as a California architect, he had no fear of history. So he uses the same red brick, he uses the bay windows, he uses historical forms in a modern building. Minoru Yamasaki at the Century Plaza Hotel in Century City. Anshin and Allen, based in San Francisco. This is one of their downtown San Francisco skyscrapers, the International Building as well. They were influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright, and they brought a sense of Frank Lloyd Wright into their skyscrapers. Mario Ciampi, the Berkeley Art Museum. Use of concrete. This is Fremont City Hall by Robert Mittelstadt. This building was demolished a couple of years ago. It's an extraordinary piece of what we would today call brutalist architecture. Very creative spaces now gone. This building has a better fate. This is the Oakland Museum by Roach and Dinklew, also concrete. But this building was restored recently and is still going on as a living part of the city. My final section here is about master planning the suburban metropolis. As I mentioned before, California isn't known, well, California, by conventional wisdom is a state of sprawl, unplanned, undirected development, just purely ad hoc for commercial reasons and profit. Well, in fact, throughout the state, there are a number of planned communities since at least, the late 19th century, but this is from the 1920s. This is Carthay Circle in Los Angeles, right off of Wilshire Boulevard. And let's see, here I'm gonna, be fancy here and use my pointer and direct you to this master planned area. This is the commercial district, school, offices, and one of the great buildings of Southern California, the Carthay Circle movie theater here. But then here are the houses laid out. And notice, for example, right here, this is a walkway through the center of the block. There are a few others of these as well. So that you did not have to drive or walk on the street. You could walk through the blocks, through greenery as well. This is a very early version of this idea of green belts, but nonetheless, here it is in the 1920s in Los Angeles. Also the late 1920s, Westwood, a entirely new development built on bean fields next to the University of California, which was also brand new at the time. But streets laid out, common unifying architecture here, Spanish colonial revival as well, landscaping, etc., to create a new modern suburban area, planned community. The Miracle Mile, which I had mentioned before as well, a linear downtown lined with high-rise buildings as well as stores, etc., to create a downtown area with residential areas one block off of the commercial street on either side. This is, in fact, one of the densest districts of any American city today. It doesn't look dense in our usual, we think of Manhattan as being dense, but this is a dense urban pattern started in the 1930s in Los Angeles. This is also at the end of the Miracle Mile, the May Company department store built in 1940. Here you see the Carthay Circle Theater. So this is where the Carthay Circle neighborhood with its commercial buildings is right adjacent to the May Company department store and other commercial buildings, as you can see along here. Take it up another 20, 30 years to Century City, planned by Welton Beckett, an entirely new city built on the back lot of 20th Century Fox. Here's the Century Plaza Hotel, which I showed you before. Here is the construction for the two towers, triangular shaped towers, which are there as well as any number of other office buildings and a shopping center, all planned. Disneyland opened in 1955 here in Orange County, also a master planned development with extraordinary impact and influence, stylistically, in terms of planning, in terms of entertainment, retailing, you name it. This is one of the most important pieces, most influential pieces of architecture in the 20th century. And it was planned and it was built in suburban California. Smaller scale, Pomona Mall as well, a street turned into a pedestrian mall designed by Millard Sheets. But this is an example I want to talk a little bit about. This is Edgewood Shopping Center, designed in 1955-56 by A. Quincy Jones and Frederick Emmons. They were architects for Joseph Eichler. And right here, let's see if I can get that arrow going. Here you see the shopping center parking lot, and here you see the Eichler houses. This is a shopping center directly related to a housing development, a mass-produced housing development. And it was meant to be pedestrian-oriented. You could walk from your home to the supermarket, to the shoe repair store, to the drugstore. It had this sign, of course, to identify it, open, glassy window walls as well, and in a style which you can see mirrors and continues in a unified manner with the buildings, the houses in the neighborhood. Park La Brea on the upper left-hand side, Park Merced on the lower right-hand side, high density, high-rise apartment housing developed alongside of commercial garden apartments as well. So it's high density, but it isn't all impacted and oppressive, because it allows for space, light, and variety. You see this over and over and over again. This is in San Lorenzo in the Bay Area. There at the top are the houses, the brand new houses that are being built. This is beginning before World War II. But then also in the center, you see the supermarket and the doctor's offices and the movie theater, all within walking distance of that housing development. Take that idea again 20 years, 25 years in the future, Irvine as well. Master planned community on an enormous scale, completely unconsidered beforehand, with green belts, with divided, in the lower right-hand corner, divided pedestrian and vehicular gradings. Local parks as well. This is up in Santa Clara, on the San Francisco Peninsula, a civic park built in the 1950s, designed by Robert Royston, landscape architect. Wonderful civic amenities. Part of suburban development was high-tech development, high-tech factories. California, of course, Silicon Valley in particular, is known for its high-tech developments, complexes, factories. Well, that has a history too. This is one of the very first high-tech developments in California from 1939. This is the Disney Studios in Burbank, designed as a small industrial town by Walt Disney and Kem Weber. CBS, 1937. William Lescaz designs the CBS studios in Hollywood. NBC Studios by John Austin from 1938 as well. The modern city responding to modern life and especially modern technology. Up in San Francisco by Albert Roller. This was originally a radio and television studio in downtown Los Angeles, or excuse me, San Francisco. IBM in San Jose as well, from the early 1950s by John Bowles, designing a new type of workplace, as well as Edward Durrell Stone, designing the Stewart Pharmaceutical Factory in Pasadena as well. This was so modern and up to date that it was put on the itinerary for Nikita Khrushchev, the premier of Russia, when he visited the United States in 1959. Going to have to speed through some of the shopping centers as well. Again, a new building type, built in suburban areas for suburban citizens as well. 1947, Bullock's Pasadena by Welton Beckett. Notice the landscaping by Ruth Shellhorn integrated into the building. The May Company in Lakewood, another master plan community with the May Company as the town center of the new development. This by A.C. Martin. Robinson's in Beverly Hills by Pereira and Luckman. Just a very upscale, very beautiful department store on several levels. The outdoor area in the lower left-hand corner was used for outdoor fashion shows and so forth. Many people visited this. That is, in the upper right-hand corner, John Kennedy driving away from the Hilton Hotel next door past the Robinsons. Morgan Walls and Clements, Styles O. Clements designed this Sears prototype at Valley Plaza in the 1950s. Up in San Francisco, Stonestown by Welton Beckett. Notice some of the details here of these display cases and the textures of the wood and the brick and the planters and so forth. These are very carefully designed buildings. John Lord King in Tiburon designing this shopping center, local shopping center. Commercial innovation, I'm going to have to go through quickly. Drive-ins, banks, another bank. Eugene Choi, an Asian American architect in Los Angeles, a bank. Frank Gehry, 1982, another bank. Commercial buildings, plain ordinary bank buildings, and yet designed with a good sense of design about them. McDonald's, an upscale restaurant in Newport Harbor by Ladden Kelsey. Movie theater by Timothy Pfluger in Alameda. Another movie theater by Hal Levitt in Westwood, now on. Imperial 400 Motels by Palmer and Kreisel. Or the Villa in San Francisco, designed by Anshin and Allen, now gone. I haven't even gotten around to, well, I'll have to do another of these webinars sometime. I just want to show you again the wide range of residential style. Don Olson, Paul R. Williams, 1948. Campbell and Wong, the A-frame. Harwell Hamilton Harris, the Havens House in the upper left-hand corner, and the Mary Blair House in Silver Lake in the lower right-hand corner. This house by Warren McAllister and Jack Hilmer I showed you before. Another house by Jack Hilmer with this magnificent living room with a solid piece of granite hewn from the Sierra Nevada backing the fireplace. The scale of this room is much larger than you might guess. John Lautner, student of Frank Lloyd Wright, the Garcia House. But he was only one of many Frank Lloyd Wright students who had an impact on Southern and Northern California. This is the house of Foster Rhodes Jackson in Claremont, another Frank Lloyd Wright apprentice. Or Kendrick Kellogg Bangs down in, or Kendrick Bangs Kellogg's, excuse me, down in San Diego. Mark Mills in Big Sur. This is Nathaniel Owings' house in Big Sur. Fred and Lois Langhorst as well, architects who worked with Frank Lloyd Wright. This is in San Rafael. Or Beverly David Thorne in the Oakland Hills. This is the house he designed in 1951 for Dave Brubeck, the jazz musician. And this is one of the last case study houses that was also designed out of steel by Beverly David Thorne. Wallace Neff, known for his historical Spanish and Tudor style houses for movie stars. This is his modern phase for a house for Groucho Marx in Truesdale Estates. Or Charles Moore in the Lee Burns house in Pacific Palisades. The same variety of styles, the Wayfarer's Chapel by Lloyd Wright, Mills College Chapel by Warren Callister, the Church by Warren Callister, a School by Quincy Jones, the Faculty Club by Charles Moore at UC Santa Barbara, a building by Harry Weiss from the 1970s, designed on sustainable issues, sustainable concepts, torn down by Stanford University 2 years ago. Albert Roller's Masonic Auditorium on top of Nob Hill. Places of entertainment. This, we're almost to the end, this is Edgewood Shopping Center, which I showed you a little bit earlier by Quincy Jones and Frederick Emmons. Upper left-hand corner is the way it was in recent years, badly maintained but intact. It has recently been bastardized. What was originally a very good example of mid-century modernism that just needed to be restored was turned into a very bad copy of mid-century modernism. Heavier, the architects did not understand or apply the original concepts. Robinson's Beverly Hills, demolished just last week. Bill Kreisel's house in Brentwood, demolished unexpectedly earlier this year. The Jack Tar in San Francisco, demolished. These buildings are threatened. From the top left, a Lautner building. On the right, Dana Point Harbor. Bottom right, Long Beach Civic Center. Edward Durrell Stone's Stanford Hospital. Richard Neutra's Orange Coast College. Also threatened in Fresno, the Fremont Mall as well, now threatened. So, to get down to it, there are these ideas, which I hope I've explained a bit. The idea of Schindler Goes Hollywood. The idea that architects are best when they respond to the local culture, climate, and understanding of the area. Bubble up and trickle down, respecting the commercial vernacular of these areas that had really great design. The work of the great commercial architects, Pereira, Gruen. This, of course, is the LA County Museum of Art, which is also today threatened. So there are all of these buildings. And in my final slide here, lower right-hand corner is the building that LACMA proposes to replace the Pereira buildings. It floats above Los Angeles. It has no connection to Los Angeles. It does not understand Los Angeles. It is a bad piece of architecture. This is a bit of critical artwork that a friend of mine did, who also does not think it is going to be a good building to build. But what it all goes back to is the idea that California has a sense of place. Every city has a sense of place. And good architecture responds to that sense of place. Historic buildings often are a keystone to show us what those things are. So, with 1 minute to go, I think I'm going to end it up. So, I don't know if we have any time for any questions, but you can email me or whatever if you have any further comments or questions. John?
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, I'm here. I wanted to thank you. I also think we'd be fine with continuing with questions. For those of you who need to leave, feel more than free to hang up at this point. But if we want to continue with questions, please type them in the chat box or the Q&A box. You can alternately, if you have a phone symbol next to you, which means you've dialed into the conference line, you can also press *6 on your phone to speak up and just ask the question in person. We prefer you raise your hand first so we can identify people one at a time. We do have one question in from the Q&A box, Alan, and it's a big picture question, so hopefully it doesn't take too long to answer. The question is coming from George. He's asking, nostalgia can be seen as a sign of dissatisfaction with the present. How do you reconcile what you call the core of California's identity in the examples shown with the present California identity?
Yeah, good question. I see it as a continuity. In fact, Peter Zumthor, in defending his design, said that the only people who like the Pereira buildings are people with nostalgia. So he's completely dismissing any sort of impulse other than a superficial nostalgia for these buildings. I see it as much more profound. I see that these historic buildings capture, the character, the identity of a place, and in a valuable way. And that actually architecture is a continuity, that today's architects can learn from the past and take it into the future, responding to the conditions of today. This is a much more complex response than mere nostalgia, mere, oh, I like that, oh, I want to keep that. That's a very different and superficial approach to design. I see a continuity. And as I mentioned with Frank Gehry, learning from Victor Gruen, and certainly taking architecture into the future, I think that's what we need to encourage in our architects today, is to know where they're building and then move into the future.
Okay, we just had another question come in, which I'm also assigning to you right now. The question is coming from Michael. He's asking, having been a California resident for 20 years and having moved here from the East / Midwest, I can appreciate how one can become smitten with California culture, architecture, climate, etc. Oh, it's just a comment. I'm sorry. So that was a comment. It was a statement. Another question that came up was about the definition of modernism and whether you believed it was a moving target, whether it should be fixed in time, what would we call every sort of architecture that pops up in the 21st century and beyond.
Yeah, modernism is, again, kind of an ongoing thing. Oftentimes people will refer to modernism with a capital M as a very specific, defined style, often the international style, abstract, flat roof, steel and glass. My working definition of modernism actually is much more ongoing. I see modernism as an effort to experiment, to try new things, to respond to not only new technology, but new cultural characteristics of an era and the interaction between technology and culture, and design buildings for that. But it is that sense of experiment that you don't have to simply repeat what they did in the past, but you can try new things. Any building that has that character to it, I consider modern. And all of these examples, wide variety of examples of styles, aesthetics that I've shown here today, but they all share that willingness to try something new, press the boundaries, experiment.
Okay, and a follow-up question: do you think you have to have been a resident to understand your point that California has had a profound influence on its architects? Will anyone get this outside of California, or will they just continue to see us a little far out?
Well, California has always, or for a long time now, been very influential. People pay attention to design in California, and it has an influence elsewhere. I think it does help to be here, to really understand what this is about. I think Frank Gehry, for example, the responses to him are kind of taken on a global basis because he's a global architect now. But if you understand his roots, where he came from, if you care to understand, then you need to understand Southern California, because a lot of what he does, well, a lot of what he does responds to. So you can enjoy a building, but if you really want to understand it, I do think you need to understand these characteristics of California.
Great. I think at this point I don't see any further questions, though anybody is more than welcome to email me, myself, or Alan, and we'll make sure it gets to the right person. It looks like one question is being typed in now, Alan, so I'm going excuse me, I'm going to wait a second here to make sure that this question is a question, and if not, seems that oh, it's just a thank you from the San Francisco Planning Department.
Okay.
But
I'm going
wanted to thank
put in my email here in the chat box, so anybody can email me.
Okay, and I'll also note that in the middle of your screen on the left-hand side is Alan's email address. So I wanted to thank everybody today for your time and for your registration, which helps support CPF's mission. And also, of course, thank Ms. Time and contribution to the organization. I'm going to return your feedback, which you'll see on the lower left-hand side of your screen. It's a survey. What you'll need to do is fill out the survey in complete form from question 1 to 9, then scroll back up to the top and hit the Submit Response button. On the top of your page are some links to the remaining parts of the series. This is a 3-part series on modernism. Second part will be by Christine French, who will speak about preserving modern architecture. The third part will be a discussion among a number of people about the movement of a motel lobby to the Las Vegas Neon Museum. We're offering this third part free to our members as a member benefit, and only $15, which is about a third of what it usually costs for non-members. So please register now, because there's a limit on the amount of people we can hold in the room. Once it hits 100, we can no longer accept any further registrants. So if you'd like, please visit Alan's website, and we all thank you for your time today, and have a beautiful rest of the day.
Well, thank you,
Thanks
everybody.
again.